Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. We've talked a lot about change on this program, evolution, reinvention, all these topics that get to the heart of what we need to do to cope with uncertainty and volatility. Well, today I'm thinking that we're going to be touching on change yet again, and from the perspective of someone who's been in an industry that has undergone incredible change over the past decade. Packaging. Now, before you run away, packaging really is fascinating. You interact with packaging every single day, from the nearly unopenable plastic torture devices that you might have to open to get your razor, or the simple cardboard box that just fell off the back of the Amazon truck. Either way, from low tech to high tech to high security, you wouldn't believe how much goes into packaging, but my guest today does. He's had 15 years in sales and leadership roles within the industry and is now the VP of Sales for Packaging Trends. He's got a lot of insight to share about change and adapting, and of course, about sales and building relationships. Please welcome to the show, my friend, Brad Levin. Brad, how you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It is good to see you. And, look, normally on the show, it's funny because I get a lot of people on who are in marketing or public relations, right? Or, or they're entrepreneurs. And I know you have an entrepreneurial streak to you as well. I don't often have somebody who's very specialized in a particular industry. And that's a real treat, I think, for me. And I think our guests our listeners are going to understand why, because it's not only about the evolution of the industry, but you've had a lot of evolution as a person as well during this time. And I think there's a parallel going on with the way that your industry evolved, but also your own personal story. And, our listeners, I of course have spoken to Brad beforehand a little bit, so I know what's coming, but our listeners are going to get, I think, a nice insight into how people cope with change in their lives and change in industries. And with that, I'd like to hear from you, Brad, about, what's your story? Let's start there. Where did you start with, how did you start in sales and get involved in the industry you're in and get to where you are today?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it by accident. I mean, maybe accident and a little bit of need. I was actually in recruiting for a while, recruiting for high-end financial jobs, about $500,000 and above. And I was recruiting for the area that got blamed for the meltdown in '08. Mm-hmm. And so my business dried up. And my wife, who's happens to be the go-to HR recruiter in New York, she's a recruiter, which is HR, and that kind of dried up as well because it's a cost center. We just bought a house in Long Island. She was pregnant with my second kid, and a little bit of panic set in. And, I was thinking someone has to reinvent themselves. And my father-in-law had a packaging company, so he said, why don't you come work for me? And all these years later, I still say if I would have taken a breath, I don't know that I would have ever gone down this road, but here we are 15 years later and, can't get out of it. So it was a little bit by need and, took a leap and, I blinked an eye and I've been here for this long.
It's interesting you start off in recruitment because my listeners know that I did too. I mean, I started off as a recruiter. I started off as a teacher. If you really want to be technical about it. And then, but when I got into business, I went straight into recruitment. And interesting connection with packaging because not really just metaphorically. I had this conversation with one of my bosses back in the day. And, I was trying to be the manager of a recruitment team, at age 26 or 27, when I could barely manage my way out of a paper bag, suddenly I have the responsibility to manage this team. Anyway, this guy, he wanted to know, about what my forecast was for the quarter or for the year. And I was doing contingency recruitment in very much the same industry that you were in, I think, and not too far off, a couple of years before that. So it was before the crisis hit when essentially you could pluck candidates off of trees and place them.
I remember those days.
Yeah, they were good days. And I was in Japan at the time. So, there was a certain, I guess, advantage to being an English speaker and a Japanese speaker, as well, a bilingual person in Japan at the time, and trying to get people placed into these high-end roles. But anyway, he says to me, so what's your forecast? And I said, I don't think I can give a forecast. I didn't have any historical data to work from, and this is way early in my business career. I had no idea what an Excel sheet was. I was just lost. So he says to me, no, I really need your forecast, because he came from a product company, from a packaged goods company. He's like, in real business, we have to deliver forecasts. And I said, okay, it's really hard to make a forecast with my product because my product is a person. And if you package a person, he will die. He didn't like that very much, needless to say. And I apologize for anybody in packaging, by the way, who's to disparage the whole industry there by saying that it kills people. But it was something. It was just an interesting thing because recruitment was like that back then. But then the financial crisis hit several years later. I was with a different company at the time, and man, I saw things dry up too. So I feel for you. Like I know where you're at. But you got into it though, and you started off. Just how did you transfer your skills? Was it that easy to go from one to the other?
No, it definitely was a struggle. And I still find it to be a little bit of a struggle as years later sometimes. But I really, my father-in-law gave me, a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of advice and was basically like, go sell. So I really got my start really knocking on doors in Brooklyn, just trying to sell brown boxes. And I was in the Bronx one day, actually, and I walked into Sabret Hot Dogs, which is a famous hot dog place in New York.
Oh, yeah.
On all the stands and everything. And they gave me a shot. It was my first customer, and I actually still have them today. That was, I guess, the start of it, and gave me a little bit of confidence, and slowly got a couple more customers here and there and picked them up. I find the hardest thing about it was getting customers is hard, but keeping customers is harder. I think that especially in packaging and what I was doing at that time, it's really a commodity thing. So, you can look good, you can be the nicest guy on the block, but somebody comes in a penny cheaper and you can lose an account. So until you're really kind of established, it's with relationships, it's really a dog-eat-dog world out there.
It's funny. It's being that it was a hot dog company, pun possibly intended.
Right.
But Sabret, I grew up on Sabret hot dogs, much to my intestinal dismay.
Right.
It's certainly in the New York area, but you're still with them today. That's incredible. But you said something that's it's not really a surprise because you were just talking about keeping customers. Getting customers is hard, but keeping customers is harder, and it's all because of relationships. And I think this is one of the areas that I really wanted to pick at with you because being a successful salesperson, and I've interviewed a few for my program, doesn't necessarily matter what you're selling or knowing your product and knowing your industry are critical competencies. So let's just stipulate that if you're a good salesman, those are some things that you do. But really, what differentiates somebody who can sell and maintain accounts is their attention to relationship building. And look, that's how you and I met, right? We met on the Connective. I mean, this is maybe you're maybe the fourth or fifth, maybe sixth person I've had from the Connective on the show. And by the way, shout out to Joe Mindak and everybody at the Connective because what a great group it is. But it shows an intentionality, I'd say, to making and growing relationships that most people, I think, that you come across might claim to have but don't have.
I would agree.
And how has that served you keeping your clients? Like, what's your approach? What's your approach to relationship building, and how does it work for you?
So I think one is being a good listener. And I think that's something that a lot of people fall short in. I think people love to talk, and I love to talk too, but there's a time and a place. I think it's really just being there. I'm certainly not the most technical person in the world. And even when it comes to packaging, one of the things I've learned most importantly is knowing what you don't know. So I don't pretend to be an expert on everything. And I think my customers know that. And instead of trying to fudge an answer, I say, let me get back to you. Let me confirm. And I think honesty goes a long way. There's nothing in my job is nothing worse than almost like a late delivery. And especially for companies that, depend on that. It's not just like a promotional thing. It's something to get their actual product on the shelves. And, just being upfront as early as you can in the process, giving them enough time to, plan around it. So I think it's really just being a genuine person, I think I find a lot. I think my first job out of college, I was a stockbroker for a really not good company. And just listening to some of these people on the phone, I was like, I just can't do that. Like, you got to have some sense of scruples and dignity and a genuineness about you. So, I think that comes off. I think I portray that a lot. And I've always just been, I like to talk to people. I like to listen, and you have conversations and a relationship develops. It's not rocket science, but at the same time, it's amazing how many people do not know how to do that. Or not, they just want to talk about themselves instead of listening to the other people. And I think that's a huge key there.
Well, that's almost like one of the main reasons I do this show, is to give people a platform and listen to them. But at the same time, I like to jump in and talk as well. I like to have it as a conversation.
Yep.
And to me, it's a learning opportunity for me. So this is a little selfishness happening here. It's a way to learn, but it's also a way to build relationships. And what you said something that's really interesting, because I just heard it the other day from one of my favorite people, Brooke Sellis, who is the owner of B Squared Media, a great agency here in New Jersey. And she's also a social media thought leader, and she's been around a lot. But she said something really interesting. She said, relationships are conversations. And, I've heard that in other places, but when she said it, it really came to me, because her business is about social media, but also about customer service. So building relationships is really about those conversations.
Yep.
Now, the Connective is like that. The Connective is connecting people, basically putting us in the right environment, the safe environment where we could have conversations and grow to know each other, right? And hopefully, do some business or connect in other ways. But what you said there about relationships being conversations, have there been situations through your career where, just having that approach and that attitude has built a non-business relationship into a client?
Yeah, it has actually. Some people that I've gone to college with that actually one of my biggest customers started out that way. My little brother from my fraternity actually was working at Benefit Cosmetics, and when I got into packaging, a few years in, I wasn't ready for that yet, and I had recently hooked up with another vendor that expanded my product line to plastic folding cartons, and he got me, a shot at Benefit, and they're still one of my customers today. They were my largest customer at one point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, there's this whole thing about, nepotism and using relations, like that's what you have to do, and it's not, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I don't think that people should be advanced just because their father's the president, but at the same time, mm-hmm. I think that to get to a point where you can, one, be successful and two, give back, you have to take advantage of those situations, friends and places that can help you out. And, mm-hmm. I like to think I'm a good friend. And if I can't help you out in business, I will always be the first one there at your door if you need something personally. So, yeah. It goes both ways, and it's not, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It can be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, there's an abundance about it. Like, I agree with you that that it definitely doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There's gains for everybody to be had. The interesting thing is about, the idea of taking advantage. And that's what sometimes it's seen as taking advantage when you build a friendship into a business relationship, or when you're out there to network or connect with people. And, the ultimate idea is to drive some kind of a financial or other benefit from that. And, to be seen as taking advantage, I think is really a misperception. Because if you're really offering value, and if you really are authentic and what you said before, a good listener, if you know what you don't know, if you're honest and you have integrity and you're genuine, right? Then how are you taking advantage? Because really, you're offering something of value, and if the other party is getting value from you, you're not taking advantage. You're having an honest exchange of value.
Yeah, so, I think it's interesting because taking that situation, that guy could have been my actual blood brother, but if he didn't have confidence in me to do the job, he wasn't going to risk his reputation on it. And,
yeah, of course.
Getting back to the Connective a bit it's one of the things that I've said since I really got involved with it is, I've been to other networking groups like BNI and mm-hmm. where you're sitting around a table and handing out cards and people are asking for referrals. And I'm always like, well, I don't really know you. So why would I refer, and the Connective allows you to kind of build that relationship and that everybody's kind of coming from the same place. So yeah. I'd always been, I do a lot of work in the cosmetic industry. So I was always in networking groups per se, and would go to these events, and I never really got much out of it. I wasn't sure if it was me or just the event. It was always a fun cocktail party, but I never really seemed to get a lot out of it. And then I'll tell my story about my pandemic experience. Yeah. Over the pandemic, I was very fortunate that one of my vendors, the one that does the plastic folding cartons, they pivoted literally in the beginning of this and started making face shields. And yeah. I was incredibly fortunate. I hooked up with a big buying consortium, and I sold like 5 to 7 million of these things in like 2 months. So by April, my year was kind of done, and it really kind of allowed me to step back and reevaluate, some personal stuff, business stuff, how I'm approaching things. During this time, at 49 years old, I realized I had ADHD and got on some medication. My son has it. My wife handed me a book and said, read this, it'll help you, with Aiden. And the first 2 pages were kind of all the symptoms, and I checked every box and was like, this is no good. So, I wasn't really that upset that I was upset that it took so long to figure out, because I think my career would have been exponentially different. But anyway, I got on the medication, and it has changed my life beyond any description I can even say. Thousands of percent it changed my life. So I started writing a book. I was, just reevaluating some things. And one of the things that really came out of it was networking and realizing that it's something that I should get better at. So I started on LinkedIn and, started getting much better at utilizing that. And I joined a few groups, and, the Connective being one of them. And it's really been an eye-opening experience to me. And I've met amazing people. I've gotten a lot of referrals. I haven't made a cold call in 2 years, which is, in my business, is crazy. I feel like it's like a support group. I'm in also another group. It's called Long Island Elite, which is more of a service-based networking group. So we take on a charity partner every year. And last year we did SIBS, and we did a gala for them and raised over $200,000 for them. And, through that is where the relationships are built, working on these events. And so, between that and with the Connectives, I always make sure that I do a few one-on-ones every week. And that's really kind of where you get to know people, just sitting around doing stuff like we're doing right now. Yeah. And you right away can tell if it's a click or not. But, 90% of the conversations I've had, or 95% of the conversations I've had, have been amazing, and even if it's doesn't lead to anything, I know there's a resource out there. And I guess the biggest thing I've learned is it's really not who you're talking to. It's who you're talking to knows. There's, one person in our group, Karina, she's in payment processing. If I was on LinkedIn looking at, through people, I would have glazed over her immediately and never even looked back. We had an amazing one-on-one. She's referred a bunch of people to me. I've made referrals to her. So it's, when you see people that's in a different field, doesn't mean that they can't help you or you can't help them. So.
Oh, sure. I mean, first of all, you've just loaded me up with a whole lot of things that I want to unpack. And I didn't mean that as a packaging play on words, but let's play a little bit. I mean, look, first of all, your approach to networking, right? It sounds like it's very methodical. And, you're over the course of the pandemic, you started with LinkedIn, joining a couple of groups, and now you kind of do something practically every day for the purpose of strengthening your connections with other people. And it's hard to say, I always throw around the word network, and I think that people interpret it differently depending on where you're standing at any given time. Is it just all the people you know? Is it the people you know, but that you want to get something from, or is it something different? I think it's a very different thing. I think it's really a live and living. It's like an organism in some ways that is, composed of course, the people that you know and the people that they know, but it requires a lot of care, a lot of directed management, a lot of intentionality. It's really I wouldn't call it a beast, but it could be if you let it go too much. Definitely. It is a living thing. You need to treat it with care.
I grew up outside Philadelphia, and I went to a Quaker school that was 80% Jewish. And we used to do a lot of service, and I would do coat drives and literally, take coats to the worst parts of Philadelphia and just hand them out. And I missed that. And what as I got older, the Long Island Elite thing was something that kind of fulfilled that a little bit. And what I realized through the Connective is wanting to be able to help people. And it's something that I struggle with, not the desire to, but the relationships that I have, can they help these people, or the people that I know, are they in need? And I often feel like I'm taking more than I'm giving, not deliberately. So I have made a conscious point of just every time I'm talking to somebody, I'm mentally just like flying through my Rolodex and any way that I can help people. And even if it's, I'll talk to people that could be potential customers that they might refer me to, but would just help them out in terms of advice or, guidance. And, that I think that helps their relationship with the person that referred me. And I've done a good deed, but, it's a little bit selfless, and I don't care, because if that's the way that I can give back and help, then that's worth it to me.
There's a certain type of magic that happens when you're, meeting with somebody or talking with somebody. It's because it's not a linear thing. It's not a robotic thing. There's not an algorithm involved here. You start a conversation, you make that connection, you have no idea what's going to bloom from this. I'm sure that there's some genius out there that's figured out the fractals and the chaos theory and all this kind of stuff. That what are the odds of you meeting so and so and so?
Isn't that like the fun of it, though?
But that is the fun of it. Right. It's totally the fun of it. But it's also, you go into it, especially like with something like the Connective, and, it depends on how you've built your connections on LinkedIn. But, there's already a certain standard, that has been met when you're introduced to people in this particular group. Right. So you cut out a lot of that early
100%.
Early trust nonsense. I'm going to trust this guy? Am I going to get sold some land in Vanuatu? I don't know.
It's the only group I've ever been in that I felt that way with.
Oh, instantly, right?
Yeah.
Instantly good people. I've been with the Connective now about 2 years, and I've seen a tremendous growth in the group, especially since Joe brought in Adrian, and like some and a few other folks have been really, Chris has taken the lead and whatnot. But it's a natural evolution of okay, let's serve our own community a little bit better, and it's just I think it's doing really tremendously, and I'm there to build relationships. And sometimes the result is I get great podcast guests, right?
Right.
But I know that it's at some point in the future, I will help others. They will help me. It's just sort of, it's baked into the cake of that thing. So it's like, I'm not in it for the now, but I wanted to go back to something that, that you just dropped almost casually in the conversation, and a sort of before and after, because, all right, you said that you were diagnosed with ADHD over the pandemic, right? During that time. So after you had your big face masks sale, had a really good year, and decided to focus in on yourself. You learned you had ADHD. Now, clearly you were successful before that, right? So,
I would say so.
At least business-wise, right?
Yep.
And then after that, you said your life changed 1,000%. This focus on networking, focus on writing, multiple focuses, foci, I suppose, right? How is it different now? Like, what is, like you said it's different, but like you were successful before, you're doing really well now. Like, what are the things that are really different?
I think there's two things. One, a direct thing of it has just been the focus. I mean, there are days where I have to, remind myself to eat, during the day, and the amount of stuff that I get done during the day, I almost can't keep up with myself. That's not necessarily a good thing, but, there are days where, you can get too far ahead of yourself. But the other side of it is, and it's a more personal thing, I think, is I feel like, I don't know, I'm just seeing the world differently. I'm seeing myself differently, and I'm just wanting more and more and more. So I've been, trying to get involved with as many things as I can. And, I, between the networking groups and getting involved in some of that service stuff from the other group. And I'm big into sustainability. I kind of fell into it a couple of years ago. I know we'll get into that, but the story, the funny story was that I was watching, somebody invited me to a Zoom on it, and after the presenter stopped talking, he opened up to the audience. I ended up talking for about 10 minutes and realized I knew a lot more about this than I thought I did. So I decided to jump in and take advantage of it. And business-wise, it's been great. I have some products that people don't have, but it's opened my eyes up to other stuff now. So like each thing I get into, I just want to go deeper and deeper. And the end result has been, over the last month, I was just elected as the Lehigh Alumni Sustainability Alliance, the chairman of that. So,
congrats.
And to me, it's something that's it's almost like way over my head, but I'll figure it out, as I go through it. But yeah, so I just find myself just like wanting to do more because I feel like I can do more now. Before, when I would take on other stuff, it would just be jumbled, and I didn't realize it at the time because when we were growing up, nobody tested for this stuff. You just, you were. And if it wasn't for my son, I probably never would have figured it out.
Well, there was always the hyper kid. Right.
But the extreme, that was the extreme.
Right. Yeah. Like, that guy, he's hyper and yeah, he's the class clown. He doesn't know how to sit down at his desk. These kinds of things were normal.
Right.
Normal things, of course, today, but yeah.
A lot of people like myself, you wouldn't think it at that time. Like I wasn't the kid bouncing off the wall. I wasn't the kid that was like hyperactive. I just couldn't, and I didn't even realize at the time that I couldn't focus. I thought it was just natural.
Yeah. Wait, was this from your childhood all the way through, or did it sort of develop over time?
It's hard to really tell. I think when I look back, I think it was probably from my childhood, but I also am a believer that I think a majority of the world has it to one degree or another. So like I hold no stigmatism to it or anything. I was just so blown away by how different, and it was like immediate. It wasn't even like it was like the first pill I took was like
really.
Yeah, it was that quick. It was so yeah. It's just been, I don't know. It's like somebody shined a light on you, and you're just seeing everything differently. And it sounds a little soupy or whatever, but it really has just made a big difference. My wife's the first person to criticize me, but she's even said, that the difference is ridiculous. So.
Well, it definitely seems like you're making the most of it and, paying it forward with Long Island Elite for sure. And on the Connective, networking and writing a book, I might add. So was the book something you were working on before, or did that happen also after?
No, it happened afterwards. It's actually funny. Like when I think of all the things that I've been doing, it almost seems like it's so ADD or ADHD just with all the different stuff, but they're all very focused. So no, I've always been told I was a good writer, and I didn't really have anything to say, and I didn't think anybody would want to read it. And then over the pandemic, when I had time, I was like, you know what? Let's sit down and just try it. And I just sat down and started writing. I put on some music, and I found the book is really it's a very fictionalized biography, but there's a lot of truth hidden under there. So when I was writing about my parents who, they both passed in the early 2000s, it was some of the most like cathartic things I've ever done. There were days I would stand up at the computer just like in tears, and then, more recently I was writing about moving to New York and my first couple of years in New York, and just like all the memories that came like flooding back. It's been like so much fun. It's been a great, just a cool thing. And, people are like, well, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe I'll get it published, maybe not. But the first thing I say is if I get it published, I have to change everybody's name or I won't have any friends left. But, and then actually somebody, I think somebody from the Connective, actually, I forget who it was. They hooked me up with a publisher, and I had a conversation with them just last week, and it was really totally informational. Like it was,
sure,
but it got me like even more pumped up about it. It was like a really cool process, and just learning about how it's done, and we'll see. I mean, I still have. I'm about 100 pages in. I still have a bit more to write. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was like 100 pages. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we're not on video for my listeners, right. but I just gave the eyebrow to Brad because I've been working on a book on and off for a long time, and I'm certainly not that far in. I'll tell you that much.
I couldn't do it about something that was not personal. Like, if it was something business related, it would take me decades, I'm sure. But some of this stuff just came pouring out. Like there were days I could write 10 pages and like in a blank. And I don't know.
I mean, it makes sense. So you get to a point. Let's look at this for a second. You learned of a mental block that you had, or of a condition that you had. You took steps to alleviate that condition, and all of a sudden, your brain is free to think in ways that you've never really been able to think before. And add to that you've had a great business year, so you had the luxury of a little bit of room to move. A lot of times people try to write, and the pressures or the minutia of the day-to-day get in their way. And I'm not saying that you can't do it if you have the minutia of the day-to-day, because clearly many people do, and it takes discipline, and it takes focus and time and, a dedication to the craft. But in your case, right, you just it sounds like you lit up in so many ways. Your life did change a lot where you were able to get out of your own way.
That's 100% it. It really is, when you talk about the minutia coming in, I feel like I've been able to separate things so things aren't like blending together. So when I decide, I basically write on the weekends, so it's a little bit easier, but I'm not thinking about anything else. Like when I'm sitting down, I'm thinking about writing, and when I'm, doing work, I'm thinking about doing work. So it gives you a little bit of clarity. And, one of the other things I learned was actually in the Connective, Jeff Michelle, who is, the master connector. He actually really changed me a lot in the way that I approach networking. And I think, everybody, until you've done it for a while, I think everybody is in it for what they're getting out of it, right? And I would hook people up, and being a natural salesperson, it's just ingrained in my head. I'd be like, well, how do I get a little piece of that, And and he basically told me stop. He was like, don't do that. And it's been hard. I won't say it's not, but I've really, made a point of just doing it and walking away. And if you do it enough, it'll come back to you. But the flip side of it is that it freed up a lot of space in my head, because I wasn't thinking about, I wonder what's going on with that deal that I hooked those two people up on. And, just stupid stuff that whatever the money I was going to make from it was not going to change my life one way or another. And, so just those things, like little things like that can provide clarity and thus focus. And, it just allows you to kind of be better at what you're doing because you're focusing on it.
If only I could get that level of focus, when I decide to get back into the writing game. I go back and forth, and I have my moments of time. And I agree with you. You said that you suspect that there's a degree of ADHD. Pretty much everybody has something going on. I've had my struggles. I don't know if I've never been diagnosed with anything. I don't know if I would be in that range. But I've had some issues with depression in my time.
Me too.
Diagnosed. I've had some difficulty in certain periods of my life, being excited about a job or being enthusiastic in any way about what I was doing. And I've started a lot of projects, and they're still started. They're just out there.
I was never like really diagnosed with it. Like I read this book, or even just the first 2 pages, and I made an appointment with a therapist, and I walked her through, and there was no test or anything. She was like, why don't you try it? And, I just got on it and I did it. And it's a weird thing. It's, I do think a lot of people go undiagnosed about it. And by no means am I like, I would never stand on, the soapbox and preach about it. Everybody has their own experience. I think, I talk about it because it legitimately, I'm so shocked at the difference that I almost can't not talk about it. Like I would explode. So, from a work perspective, my productivity is probably quadrupled since I've gotten on there. And I think my activity like shows it. But, sometimes it's almost too much. Like sometimes because I was the way I was, I never developed the best organizational skills, and I never, so keeping everything in line now is my struggle, remembering everything and keeping things organized.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to actually ask you next. Is you'd mentioned that, you're doing so much networking and among other things, right? So, there's the book, there's networking, there's your day-to-day work, there's your family, preparing your son for his bar mitzvah. There's a whole lot going on. The daughter is getting towards the driving/college age. It's a lot to handle, right? So if you didn't have the organizational skills before and you're struggling with it now, what are you doing to try to keep it all in line?
Praying. No, I'm getting better at it. For work, I try to put everything in, like a database. So I have notes on everything, but I look at my networking as work. I enjoy it tremendously, but it's taken the place of the cold calling or, the prospecting. And, I definitely do some sort of networking every day. And, that again, it's in place of making the cold call. It's in place of, dropping things off at places and hoping to get in there, dropping samples off at some places. So I used to drive hundreds and hundreds of miles, a week, just driving to places, dropping off stuff, hoping to, maybe meet somebody. And I realized how much time was wasted by that. And, it kind of brings me to like the Zoom thing that, all the Zoom fatigue. I think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. I love it. I get so many meetings and there's not, wasted time driving in the car or, so I hope it's here to stay because it's, I really, it's been a big help to me.
Well, let's divert there for a second because I do have something to say about Zoom fatigue. I agree with you. I really think that Zoom or let's just call it, this video conferencing enabling technologies that are really like in real time, synchronous communication like this has been a real boon to those of us who communicate for a living. I mean, and I include salespeople in that, like clearly, because persuasion is really where you're trying to go. And if you can actually reach people, then any, I think, tool that enables you to reach people easier and effectively is a good one. Plus, look, we've been doing this now for a few years. I mean, the pandemic changed a lot of the way that we do this. Now everybody's either going to continue to be using video conferencing, let's just call it Zoom for shorthand, right? But people are going to continue using Zoom or a hybrid of some kind where they're going to be on Zoom some days and in the office some other days or out visiting clients or whatever it is. That's with us. When you're looking at somebody on a screen, it is an opportunity to connect and to certainly, to make those, I think, important, I'm not going to say judgments, but learnings about people, that you could normally do in person as well. But anyway, like the interesting thing about Zoom fatigue, perhaps certain types of people are totally hardwired for like, let's go, get to the next meeting, next meeting. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, my great friend, Michael Glazer, who's been on my show, and he was interviewing a wonderful lady named Laura McHale. And I've just bought her book, Neuroscience for Organizational Communication. So at some point, I believe I'll be reading this. But in the podcast, she talks about Zoom fatigue, and the interesting thing is, it's not caused by having meeting after meeting after meeting. The Zoom fatigue part is actually caused predominantly by the fact that you're looking at yourself.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That you're on the screen, and you spend a lot of time kind of looking back at yourself and seeing how you're looking, and it just messes with your head. So imagine you're sitting around a campfire telling stories. Is there a mirror over there? Right? Does somebody bring a mirror so that you can look at yourself while you're telling stories? It never happened. That's
right.
No, of course not. So on Zoom, turn yourself off. Don't turn your camera off, but you can go and click and hide your view.
Yeah.
And that way I'm telling you, I've been doing that all week. It's a game changer.
That's interesting.
I don't know. I don't necessarily feel like I'm less fatigued yet.
Right.
But I feel like I've been paying attention to people more. And it's really interesting. So I highly recommend you give it a shot.
It's funny. On a totally vain note, one of the other things I did is start seeing a nutritionist, and I dropped somewhere between 25 and 30 pounds over the last 8 months or something like that. So
good for you.
I'm not so bad. Looking at myself isn't so bad now. I'm like, look how thin I am.
So, I'm looking at myself, and they say the camera adds 10 pounds, but I just think I added 10 pounds. In fact, I know I did.
That's the other thing, though, that I've done really also is I've started reading a lot. You brought that up, book that you just brought up, and it's really been a great thing to clear your mind. And I have to, for some reasons, I have to start reading a couple business books, but I've mostly been reading, just novels and stuff. And it's a really relaxing, end of the day type thing. I read for a half hour, 45 minutes or whatever. And you don't think about anything else. It just takes your mind. And then when you're done, you don't really go back to thinking about stuff. So it's a great way to kind of wind down.
And has all of this, just now we're steering back, has all of this been the result of you figuring out really who you are now, or figuring out about your
I think condition? I think I always enjoyed reading, but I always did it just on the beach, on vacation or whatever. But now I feel like I typically do it at pretty much the same time, around 7:00 at night, and the medicine's kind of wearing off and I'm kind of mellowing out, and it's just, I feel I can still keep my attention on it. I could read books before and, read 5 pages and so I'm like, oh, what was that about? I'd be like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading the words, but nothing's computing in my head. I'm just thinking about other stuff, So that's been cool because I feel like I enjoy it, and it's just a good way to kind of wind down for me.
I love it. I mean, I'm a big reader. I am still trying to really get excited about business books because I never really have been. Sometimes like there's the occasional business book that really is just so well done and so well written that I fall right into it and I do love it. I can never read them like a page turner, like a novel.
Right.
But but I get pretty excited about books, and then I start them, and then I have a lot of started books too. I have a lot of finished ones.
I have that too. Now I get through them. So
yeah, I'm telling you, man, I should get myself checked out. But but the point is, right, that you've had a lot of change in your life, and you've really, it seems like you're really taking the I guess the bull by the horns. I was going to try to think of some terrible cliche. I found one, and you're really moving forward with that. But like, I wanted to ask you how now it's really affected your work, because let's turn back a little bit towards packaging. I did say in the intro that we would talk a little packaging. We don't have to very much, but I find it fascinating, right? So like one of my things, I'm just a really curious person. And I've worked with packaging firms in the past, in past iterations of my life as a communications consultant or whatever. And even within my last company, we had a business that was, did machines that made cardboard for packaging companies, right? So, I knew a little bit about it. I just find it fascinating. People don't think about it that much, right? There's so much that you have to deal with. This is something that everybody's touching every single day. Like every day you're dealing with packaging one way or the other. So you have a big impact on people's lives, right? That's point number one. Point number two is this whole idea about sustainability in packaging. Now, and I do want to kind of hear what your thoughts are on just, you said you were at a sustainability discussion, and then you started talking. You knew more about sustainability than the lecturer at the time. So in packaging or even beyond, right? What are you seeing in sustainability that we really need to be mindful of? So I know I loaded up there with a couple of different things.
Yeah.
Choose whatever you want to talk about. Go for it.
Let me start with the first thing you said about the importance of packaging. And people always say, like, I'm a little bit blasé about sometimes, like, I'm like, yeah, a box is a box. It's not like, but it's really not true. Like I work now with a lot of startups, and I work with large companies too, and I'll take L'Oreal 7 days a week, twice on Sunday. But you go into L'Oreal, and it's really kind of like order taking, right? Because they have in-house design teams, and so when I work with startups, I can kind of, whatever expertise I've gained over the last 15 years, can help guide them in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing, different materials, things like that. So it's a little bit more rewarding. And one of the things that I always tell them, packaging is like, for some reason, it's always the last thing that people think about. And I, always tell them, like, listen, the packaging is the first thing that most people see about your brand. So make it count, and, a lot of that has to do with graphics. A lot of it has to do with material. A lot of it has to do with shapes and things like that. But, it really is a statement about what your brand wants to be. And if you don't pay attention to it, you're just hurting yourself. The sustainability side of it is, I struggle with it a little bit. I'm certainly not a sustainability warrior by any means. And I've called myself a little bit of a hypocrite in the past because I think I'm more sustainable in my business life than I am my personal life. I'm trying to get better, and I'm getting there. But, I'll give you an example of kind of the ridiculousness of some of it is, working with some of these startups. They want to be 100% sustainable. And I fully appreciate that. And I think it's a great way to go. The problem is that we're still at a point where sustainable products are more expensive than non-sustainable products. So a lot of startups, they can't necessarily afford it. And the minimum order quantities are also a lot higher than what they would be typically ordering. So,
Can I ask, so how do you define a sustainable product, first of all? Like, because people think, oh, that means it's recycled. But it's not. That's not what it means. It's a
little bit of a loaded question because there's a lot that goes into it. And, a lot of it's material, where it's coming from, what it's made of. Is it recyclable? Is it recycled? Is it biodegradable? Is it, there's a lot of different things that go into it. And everyone, has its good points and its bad points. So there's no perfect answer here. And that's kind of where, I think people get in trouble a little bit, because I'll talk to a company and, I want this fully sustainable product. Okay. And I can find it, but you can't afford it. And like, well, what about China? I'm like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose, because you could find the most sustainable product ever in the world there, but shipping it over here on a cargo ship, negates any sustainable gain that you're doing. So it's, some of it's just lack of knowledge about it, and some of it is, I hate the term of greenwashing, and I think, people just need to really educate themselves about it. So like what I always tell people is that, especially startups, is any step that you're taking is better than not taking a step at all. So you can't be everything to everybody, and you may not be able to do everything all at once. So from a packaging perspective, go with the packaging you have now. Okay, you launch your product, and 6 months to a year, when you can afford it, you change your packaging, and it's almost like relaunching your brand, and it will actually can attract more people to you. So this thing of 100% sustainable, one, it's not really achievable, because no matter what you do, it's not 100% achievable. But there's still things that you can do that are really positive, and, I can't, it really bothers me when these entrepreneurs beat themselves up over it, because you're still doing a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of things that you can do behind the scenes that should be good enough. You know what I'm saying? You don't need to necessarily, and I think it's that way with a lot of things in life. You do a good deed, you don't need to go advertise it to 1 million people, and
it's true.
So I think that, there's a lot of that pressure that people put on themselves, and they don't realize a lot of the benefits that you can be doing to help the environment without people knowing it, and I have a company I used to work for is owned by a friend of mine that I went to high school with. And they created this tray. When you go to the stores and you see trays on the shelves and they have products in them. Most of the time, those trays have to go into a shipper box. And they developed something years ago where they got rid of the shipper box and just attached a hood to the tray. And you just take a tear strip and pull it off, and you're left with the tray. And what that did was it eliminated a lot of material. It eliminated people at pack out and eliminated weight for shipping, and provided a great product. And all those things. So it wasn't just this box that they created. It was this trickle down effect that went throughout the entire company, that made them that much more sustainable. They did this. Sustainability wasn't even in their mind, I don't think, at the time. But it turned out that this was a very sustainable product. And so, there's just a lot of different ways of thinking about it. And, one of the things, as I mentioned, this last, the Lehigh alumni sustainability thing, they've been very focused on, because Lehigh is an engineering school. So they're very focused on engineering and building environmentally safe things, and which is great. I want to kind of expand that more to other sectors. So, especially when we're talking to students, that there's a lot of different careers where you can do that, even like marketing or retail.
Sure.
And, because packaging, is a big part of the sustainability thing when it comes down to the conversation. So, going into packaging design, or again, even marketing that message that you want to get out to people. So, it doesn't have to be an engineering position. So, there's just such a wide array of things to get involved with, and avenues to travel down. And I don't, I know my stuff, fairly well, but I learned today, I was on a call today about sustainability, and I realized how much I don't know, there's just so much out there that, and the other thing is it seems like it's changing by the second. So
we learn more and more every day about it. And a lot of greenwashing does happen, where people say that they're sustainable when they're not, ultimately, or they're, they're relying on certain aspects.
They think they're being it, but
they're being it, but they're not. Or they just have the wrong idea of it and don't want to think too far. There's a lot of hidden ugliness behind some of what we think is sustainable behavior. So to really know if you're doing the right thing, you have to go all the way down the value chain, right? You have to really go down. Okay, yeah, it's recycled, and this is the materials, and it's all good. Where is it sourced from? It's sourced from here. Oh crap, there's a strip mine there, and there's they're using slave labor. Fuck, right? So then you're not, what good are you doing? Seriously. So then you can, you have to start from scratch, or you have to take that and say, this is the sad truth of things. We're going to move towards a better product or a better, in the future and so on. So, it's more important the steps you're taking, I think, and that you recognize what's going on. And,
otherwise you won't get anything done. I mean,
well, it's true. It's true. Yeah. But it seems like you're super passionate about this, which is, counts for maybe 80% of the success that you might be having in this field. And did you find that passion really kicked into higher gear after you found out that you had ADHD, or have you always had that?
No, you know what? Like I said earlier, I really kind of fell into this by accident. And I don't even know that I was aware of the knowledge that I had about it, because I've been doing it some ways this whole time without even realizing it, in terms of trying to make packaging more efficient, using less material, but not even putting it in those terms. It was just more for making a better box, or making a better. And so it wasn't really till it came in vogue that I even clicked into it and realized, listen, I've been kind of doing this stuff already. And so I've been a little bit of a sponge about it. And from that perspective, the medicine probably helps, just because I can focus on it.
Yeah.
But I also have to say, like, I can't, I don't know that I'd be able to eat if it was the only thing I did, so, not everything that I do, the good thing is, like, for example, the vendor that, makes plastic folding cartons, they're now able to make 100% PCR plastic. So post-consumer recycled material is great, so that moves us in a good direction also. And so it seems almost now like if you're in packaging, you have to be involved with it, I mean, unless you're in, some part of it that it's just not even feasible, but it's come across in almost every substrate that I use, and, it's been, it's good. And what it's, from a business perspective, it's opened doors to me, working with some of these startups that are so into it and being able to impose some wisdom or whatever. But along those lines, I've made relationships now with manufacturers of actual products. So for like personal care creams and CBD lotions and tinctures, like I can now help people go from formulation through distribution. So it has, it's helped open some doors for me, and I'm a little bit of a mercenary. I'm the first to say it. And, but I do have good intentions behind it. Like I wouldn't be able to sell it if I didn't believe it, and sometimes you just, you kind of get lucky and you fall into something that you already knew more about than you thought. And you can kind of, try to be a leader with it. And if I can, that's one of the things I like, about the networking. I relate it to almost startup companies, is that, okay, even if I do something with it, I'm not making that much money because it's a startup, but even if I can just pass on some knowledge, like I find that to be very rewarding to me, and hopefully it's rewarding to them too. Hopefully I'm giving them the right advice, but I think as I'm getting older, I find that to be more satisfying. And I also think it helps build my business. Like I think, just having a conversation with people, it's happened on some of these networking calls I've had, just one-on-one, and they haven't been about selling myself. But then later they will call me and be like, hey, you said something interesting. I'm working on X, can you help? And that's great for me, but it's also, hopefully spreading some awareness to other people.
We want to do good, we want to be, I don't want to say we want to be
Quaker background.
It's the whole thing, right? I mean, the whole mishpucha, as we say, like the whole, I mean, we, especially as we get older, we definitely want to have a legacy we can be proud of. And I think that, it's natural in some ways that the ideas of like sustainability and networking for good and just kind of paying it forward and helping people out would play a larger role in contributing to your happiness than it might have earlier, or than you would have thought earlier in your life, right? But I mean, look, you've had so much to say about building relationships and about trust. I think there's a lot of takeaways here from this conversation, and I mean, I've learned a little bit more about packaging as well, and we didn't even dig too much into that whole industry, and that's cool. But I do want people to know that if anybody has any questions about packaging, Brad's the man. Just go to packagingtrends.com and you will, you can certainly find his business and everything he's doing about packaging. But, before we go, Brad, because we do have to wind it down, do you have any last words? Is there anything like that's keeping you up at night that you want to kind of share with us and kind of give your last here a little bit?
I've been finding, listen, I don't consider myself old, but I've considered the things that the way my mind works now, nothing to do with the medicine, just as age and like experience that you have. And like I said earlier, I went to a Quaker school, and I had this teacher there, and his name was John McCollum, and I get emotional about this guy. So he was a Black gay man in a very conservative area of the main line in outside Philadelphia, and was the my 12th grade English teacher. Okay, this guy had a reputation, and he was like, everyone was scared of this guy. Okay, and he loved it. He loved that people were scared of him. But he was the most sincere, caring person I've ever met. And I had an incident in high school where with a girlfriend, it could have gone the wrong way, and I'm walking down the hall one day, and I hear this bellowing, "Mr. Levin, my office now." Okay. And everybody in the hall just turned around. They were like pointing at me like, ooh, and I'm in there like scared out of my mind. And he goes, "What's wrong?" And he sat there and listened to me for 40 minutes and walked me through this problem. And later he, a week later, after an English class I was there, my girlfriend at the time busted in the room and came and gave a hug. And he goes, as I'm walking out, let's say, "Mr. Levin." I was like, "I take it that was good news?" And I was like, "Yeah." So, that has always stuck with me for a number of reasons, but mostly for the sincerity of him. And about 8 years later, maybe, he passed away from AIDS. And they had a memorial service back at my school, and they had a very special meeting for worship. And for people that don't know, Quakers in a meeting for worship, you kind of stand up and say what's on your mind and moved. And in all the years that I've gone to, which I had to do all through school, I maybe stood up one time, and I just never did. I stood up at this meeting in front of like to the rafters people, like more people that could fit in this auditorium, and shaking, but stood up and did it. And I spoke for like 10 minutes about this guy, and I had people laughing and people crying. And I, left there and realized just how much this man affected me. At the time when you're that age, you don't realize it. And I think now that I'm at a point in my life, I want to give back more. And I just want that. I want to be able to help people. And whether it's selfishly makes me feel good or not, I don't care. I want to be able to help people. And if I can do that in business, it's great. I always tell people, listen, if nothing comes of it, nothing comes of it. But, it's part of the reason why I've been trying to do more and more things, just to make up for some lost time that I think I should have been doing stuff. But, that's kind of at the stage where I'm at now. And whether it's with kids or with people I don't even know or people I do know, just being helpful just goes a long way. And it doesn't have to be big things at all. It can be anything. So that's what I would say at this point.
Yeah. Living up to the legacy of Mr. McComb. It's a big, it sounds like he's big shoes to fill in it. And, those kinds of formative experiences we should cherish, obviously, and you do throughout your life. Brad, it's been a pleasure. I've learned so much about you, but I've also really kind of had I think a really good understanding of making connections that matter, and learning more about, sustainability, of course, but really learning more about you. And I've really appreciated your time. You can find Brad, again, like I said, you can find Brad at packagingtrends.com. That's his company, or just look for him on LinkedIn, Brad Levin Packaging. And I'll spell his name properly in the episode title. But if you have anything else to say, or anything else if you want to get in touch with him, just feel free to reach out. I can put you in touch, or you can just go out on LinkedIn and find him. So thank you so much, Brad. This has been a pleasure. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.